Good morning. We're not going to wait for Councilwoman Crowley, but she is coming.
Yes.
Good. This is a serious subject. 6 weeks ago, a 12-year-old boy and both his parents died in a house fire in the Belmont section of the Bronx. Fire officials quickly determined that the building was an illegal conversion that had been altered to house more residents than it safely could. And as a result, the 3 people who died in the fire were effectively cut off from any escape once the fire broke out. Over the years, such tragedies have occurred again and again, and even as fire safety in our city has improved and fire fatalities have declined to record lows, illegal conversions have continued to pose a serious fire safety threat, not just to the residents of the converted buildings, but also to their neighbors and to firefighters as well. This has been a problem that has gone on in this city for many, many years, and it has gotten worse and worse. The estimates are anywhere between 200,000 to something like 3 or 4 times that live in buildings that have been converted illegally. And we have worked very hard, and I think previous administrations have as well, but there have been plenty of impediments to being able to get inside and to find which buildings really have violations. After the Belmont fire, we did direct city officials to develop new strategies for cracking down on illegal conversions. Hopefully these will work. We keep trying, and we will not stop until we find a solution. Our solution this time is we established a multi-agency task force chaired by Chief Policy Advisor John Feinblatt. And today, based on his work, we're launching a new campaign to systematically identify buildings that face the highest risk of illegal conversion fires. The task force will quickly and aggressively inspect those properties and take all necessary steps to prevent fires and save lives. The task force tested its procedures last week. They inspected 15 buildings, and because they found immediate, this is a different version? When does different versions show up? Just before I walked in the door. That's good. All right, well, I'll go. Here. Not a problem. They inspected 16 buildings. That was the big change. Sorry about that. That's the advantage of modern technology. You can always get the latest. On the other hand, if it comes as you're walking into the room, you don't know to go look for it. They inspected 16 buildings, and because they found immediately life-threatening conditions, issued vacate orders in 6 of them. Now, multi-agency cooperation is crucial to this new task force strategy. By studying past fires in illegal conversions, we came up with a model to determine where the risks are greatest. We've integrated cross-agency data that includes the age of buildings, records of foreclosure proceedings or of late or incomplete property tax payments, fire casualties in particular neighborhoods, and previous illegal conversion complaints. Now, we're cross-tabulating that data with fresh complaints about illegal conversions received by 311 and also going directly to the buildings department. Last week's test started with 225 such recent complaints. The task force then completed a risk assessment of them using the model I just described. That's how they came up with this target list of 16, not 15, 16 buildings. They inspected them all and issued these 6 vacate orders. And to give you an idea of how effective this risk assessment method is, nearly 40% of last week's trial inspections led to vacate orders, and that compares to a rate of just 3% of vacate orders in buildings inspected for illegal conversions in each of the past 3 years. One big reason for the success with this program, we think, was that inspectors got into all the buildings we targeted because they were accompanied by uniformed members of the fire department. What we wanted to see was whether having FDNY presence in uniform at the door would consistently make a difference in persuading occupants to let inspectors in. At least in this test, apparently it did. And it's now going to be a standard operating procedure for the task force going forward. And we hope that will finally, we found a solution, get past the biggest barrier in investigating illegal conversions. The truth of the matter is, if inspectors can't get in, they have to get a court order, and in most cases that requires evidence not typically available by looking at the outside of the building. Evidence bad building owners have become very savvy at concealing. So the difference here is very little other than when you knock on the door, there is a uniformed fire department person standing there with the building inspector. and that, at least in the test case, seemed to convince people to open the door. Whether it will continue to, I don't know, but we are not going to walk away from trying to solve this problem. Our task force will update its list of high-risk buildings every week. Teams of inspectors will visit those buildings within 48 hours. This highly focused effort will supplement the already aggressive enforcement done by the Buildings Department and will also continue our aggressive public education efforts. In the past year and a half, we've distributed more than 150,000 flyers in 10 different languages, warning New Yorkers about the dangers of illegal conversions in targeted neighborhoods. They let tenants know what to look out for and avoid. This new task force adds a powerful new weapon to our attack on illegal conversions, and we know that Speaker Christine Quinn and her colleagues are also deeply concerned about this issue. In fact, the Council's Committee on Buildings is holding a hearing about illegal conversions later today. They are our partners in government, and we are committed to working together on this important issue. So now let me turn the floor over to Speaker Christine Quinn. Chris?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Let me first recognize my colleagues. The chair of our Housing and Buildings Committee, Eric Dillon, couldn't be with us this morning, but he and Liz Crowley, the chair of our Fire and Criminal Justice Committee, will be holding that oversight hearing later this afternoon. I also want to thank and recognize Councilmembers Oliver Capel and Peter Ballone, who have been working on this issue in a legislative capacity for quite some time, and I have no doubt will be active participants in the oversight hearing this afternoon. Not too active, but just active. And I want to thank the mayor, all of his staff, and the fire department, the Department of Buildings, and HPD, who have long been working to try to find solutions to the problem of illegal conversions and access into those buildings. 2 recent fires in the Bronx and Brooklyn took lives of 5 people, and these fires demonstrated just how dangerous and life-threatening illegal residential conversions are to emergency responders and the New Yorkers who reside in these apartments, often residing in these apartments not knowing that they are in dangerous conditions. Too often we found that agencies weren't getting access to the buildings to investigate complaints or weren't sharing critical information about potentially problematic buildings between themselves in a prioritized response kind of a way. That's why today I'm very pleased to stand here with the mayor and the leaders of city agencies and my council colleagues to announce and support this new inspection task force, which will prioritize inspections based on metrics developed to identify high-risk illegal conversions. The initial results, as the mayor said, in addition to the metrics by having uniformed FDNY folks with the inspectors, are very encouraging, and finally a major step forward in addressing this very serious and life-threatening problem in our city. We recognize that the problem of these illegal conversions must be dealt with at many different levels, from receiving illegal conversion complaints to investigating the complaints and seeking access, from enforcing access warrants to preventing illegal conversions in the first place. The results of the first round of inspections under this new model are very promising. But let us be clear, as the mayor has said, this is a work in progress. And in the weeks and months ahead, we will make sure that all aspects of the inspection and access system are reformed to reflect this new, comprehensive, and holistic approach. It means beginning at the point of intake. 311 operators will have a new set of questions for callers. Questions that will allow a complaint to be appropriately evaluated and prioritized. It means that we will develop a formal process of coordination and information sharing between agencies on and about illegal conversion cases. We'll develop formal protocols to guide agencies regarding when to seek access warnings. And as the mayor and his staff have indicated by announcing this task force, we're also going to be having a working group led by Deputy Mayor Gibbs, one that will look at ways of ensuring safe and affordable housing so people's only options aren't illegal conversions. We'll be having an oversight hearing this afternoon, as the mayor has said, and I want to thank the mayor and his staff for taking this oversight hearing so seriously that they're going to be coming to today's hearing and prepared to discuss the model that we are announcing today and other ways through policy, coordination, and legislation that we can move forward to protect New Yorkers from illegal conversions and the damage and life loss that they cause. Thank you.
Chris, thank you. Deputy Mayor for Operations Steve Goldsmith oversees the buildings and fire departments, and I'd like to ask him to comment on this new effort against illegal conversions. Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just reiterate very briefly. This tragic occurrence led to a number of reforms which the Mayor has announced today. There's two fundamental principles. One is that we deal in high-volume situations, and the analytics that John Feinblatt will talk about has allowed us now to concentrate on the worst of the worst, the most dangerous, and go after those with high priorities. Secondly, that the interagency cooperation, particularly between buildings and fire, allows us to have teams where entry is much more likely than previously. So hopefully these are the beginning of important reforms which will continue in the coming months. Thank you, Mayor.
Steve, thank you. Our Chief Policy Advisor, John Feinbach, as I said before, chairs the task force, and along with Sherry Hyman on his team, led the development of the risk assessment tool that it is going to use. John, you want to comment on the announcement?
Sure. Right after the tragic fire that occurred on April 24th, the mayor basically asked two questions. One was, could we identify high-risk properties so that we would be able to prioritize inspections? And the second question, of course, was, could we get into the buildings to ensure that people were safe? To answer the first question about the high-risk properties, what our task force did was conduct extensive interviews with enforcement units at the fire department, the Department of Buildings, and at HPD, and we then studied 50 fires in depth that had happened over the last 3 years. From that qualitative data and the very intensive look at these 50 fires, we came up with a theory that there were really 4 factors that would correlate to a higher risk of fire. A history of Department of Building complaints about that property, an owner in some sort of financial distress, hadn't paid taxes or was actually in foreclosure, whether the building was in a neighborhood with a prevalence of crowded, low-rise buildings with low-income residents, and whether the construction of the building had happened before the modern building code. To test the theory that we created an entirely new database for the first time. And what we did was we took the 600,000 or so 1 to 3 family dwellings, merged information from fire, building, city planning, the Department of Finance, and court records, and then looked at the 2,000 fires that had occurred in these types of buildings over the past 3 years. And what we found was absolutely striking. The presence of 2 of the 4 risk factors made a building 4 times as likely to have a fire in that building than if no risk factors were present. The presence of 3 of the 4 risk factors meant the property was 8 times more likely to have a fire, and buildings with all 4 risk factors were a stunning 16 times more likely to have a fire. The bottom line, where there's smoke, it's more likely that there'll be a fire. So the data showed that our theory was right, but we needed to prove it on the streets to show whether we could actually, outside of our offices, make this workable on the street and actually provide a prevention tool on the ground to prevent fires. And so what we did was we took the 225 illegal conversion complaints that had come into the Department of Buildings over the last 2 weeks. We chose those buildings that had all 4 risk factors, which was, as the mayor said, about 16 buildings. We found that once we inspected those, 40% of them resulted in vacate orders, meaning that the risk of fire was high enough that we had to either completely or partially vacate the premises. And as the mayor said, this compares to an average 3% vacate rate we get typically from inspections. So it's clear that with these new tools, we're no longer looking for a needle in a haystack. Our access to buildings was obviously far less complicated. What we realized and tested, again, as the mayor said, was that if you put the buildings department and the fire department together to do these inspections, we can virtually get in every time that we go. There's no question that a uniform makes a difference. So what have we accomplished? In the last 6 weeks, we developed a first-of-its-kind protocol to better assess fire risk and guide the efforts of these new joint inspection teams. We've shown that this new tool will sound the alarm, and it is a major step forward in helping us prevent these tragedies and hopefully save lives. Thank you.
John, thank you. I'd like to ask the Fire Commissioner, Sal Casano, and Buildings Commissioner, Bob Lamandri, to discuss the procedures this task force will follow. First, Commissioner Casano.
I'd like to thank Mayor Bloomberg for making this issue such a top priority for all of us. Too often, people think the fire department only puts out fires. A large part of what we do is prevent fires, and there's no more dangerous place to be for citizens as well as our firefighters than an illegally converted apartment or building. The problems with illegal conversions are twofold. One, the changes that are made, moving or putting walls up, and running extension cords from room to room for electricity increases the chance of having a fire. And two, when fires occur, the occupancy becomes a potentially dangerous maze when someone is trying to escape a fire. As the mayor said, there's a danger just not to the occupants, but to the firefighters as well. We've worked hard in recent years to crack down on these dangers, and in the past 3 years, we've increased our inspection time for our firefighters by 33%. And we've established a specialized unit to look at buildings under construction, demolition, and abatement. We're also building a risk-based inspection system that provides critical building safety information to field units before they arrive at an emergency or an inspection. This will allow fire companies to prioritize inspections at buildings that present the greatest danger to the public and first responders. The model recalculates the list daily, making certain that we get to the right places as quickly as possible. All of this has helped make a difference. Last year, we had the fewest civilian fire deaths in any recorded history, 62. We're also seeing fewer firefighters than we ever had before in New York City. But as I've always said, every fire death is one too many. That's why this new task force, in which each agency brings its strengths and resources, will help us address these dangerous situations more quickly and effectively, and we're looking to work with all the partners as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Bob?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Robert Lamandri, the Buildings Commissioner. You know, we're really talking about 3 items here today. One is enforcement, which we're specifically talking about doing things differently in a more creative way to get to the heart of the issue. The second is education, which the mayor touched on earlier, which is to identify for New Yorkers how to look for the signs. What are the telltale signs to protect yourself? And the third is to come up with new housing opportunities in the future. Those 3 pieces today about enforcement, and I'm very, very satisfied that the department is getting some assistance from the fire department as well as HPD. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner, thank you. Before taking questions, let me just summarize for our Spanish-speaking audience. Hemos creado un nuevo grupo de trabajo para hacer inspecciones en edificios que han sido convertidos ilegalmente, donde hay un gran riesgo de fuegos. Vamos a hacer lo posible por prevenir los fuegos y evitar tragedias. With that, we'd be happy to take some questions if anybody